Hello everyone, welcome to part 7 of manual software testing interview questions, and in this video I'm going to cover another 10 important manual testing interview questions which are listed on the screen. So the first question that I'm going to cover in this video is what is the difference between black box and white box testing. Second will be around functional testing, then non-functional testing, and then what is the difference between functional and non-functional testing. Then what is static testing, and then what is dynamic testing, what is the difference between static and dynamic testing, and then we will be discussing about what is the test development process and why exactly it is important, right? So it is kind of important to understand what something is and then why it is important as well. Then what is test analysis and what is test design. So this forms the 10 questions of part 7. So let's get started. So the first question, or 61st question of this whole series: what is the difference between black box and white box testing? Right now, in the previous video, in the part 6, we have already covered what is the black box testing and white box testing. Now let's understand what is the difference between that, right? So the difference between black box and white box testing is that, as we have understood, that black box testing is mostly input output driven, right? So you do not bother about, or you do not know what happens internally in a particular application in the software, how the methods, classes, etc. are being called. If you are testing an e-commerce application, you will simply launch the application in the browser. You are testing a registration functionality, you will click on the register button. You are testing the login functionality, you will enter the username and password and click on the login button and ensure that the user is able to log in. If you're testing registration functionality, you will ensure user is able to register and you are getting the registration successful message, right? So basically you do not bother what happens when I'm entering the username, password and clicking on the login button. What method gets called, what call happens, what API gets called. You are not bothered about any of that. That is what black box testing is all about. It is more input and output driven. When we say input, you are inputting the username, password and clicking on the login button and then expecting the outcome, right? That login should be successful. You should be redirected to the home page. So black box testing is input output driven, whereas white box testing is more of verifying the internal working structure. What happens when somebody enters username and password and clicks on login button, which method gets called. You will be basically tracing back to the code, which method, which class gets called, then internally what happens, which another subroutine gets called. So if a tester or if a developer is basically verifying that level of detail, how the actual code behind the scene is being called and works, that is white box testing, right? So that is the basic difference of black box and white box testing. So in the black box testing, it is input output driven. The software is a black box for you. You do not worry about internal working and implementation of the application. You just do the input output driven sort of testing, and in white box you are bothered about the internal working and structure of the application as well. So that's the core difference between black box and white box testing. Now the next question, 62nd question, is what is functional testing? Now we have briefly touched based on the functional testing as well previously, but let's cover a little bit about functional testing as well, bit more detail. So functional testing, as the term itself suggests, it's testing the function or functionality of the system or application. So for example, you are using any mobile app. Okay, so let's say YouTube mobile app. Okay, now when you are launching that particular app, okay, clicking on the search icon, does the search text bar appears? Okay, and in the text bar are you able to type in the content that you want to search, and then when you click on the search, are you able to get the search results, right? So this is one of the core functionalities of the YouTube app or YouTube website. So when you go ahead and test any of the functionalities that are provided by any of the app, mobile app or the desktop app or the website that you are browsing through, that is what functional testing is all about. Okay, it is testing the functionality, right? And functionality of the system is described in the documents, right? So whenever a software is being built, for example, I want to build a training portal, then as a training organization, I'll define those requirements, the functionalities that I'll need in that particular training portal, right? For example, if we take a simple example of day-to-day life, right? So when you are ordering something, right? So when you say, for example, you want to order a particular customized app or customized phone or customized car, say for example, then as a customer, you define your requirements, right? You define your requirement either verbally or written in a day-to-day. So for example, you're customizing your bike or your car with a different color, different theme. Then you go ahead and you define those requirements, right? For the shopkeeper to basically customize your car in a particular way. You want additional functionality in your car. So that definition of specification is defined by the customer, right? So functionality of any software is defined by the customer who is requiring or who wants that particular software to be built, right? So it is basically defined in the functional specification, user stories, use cases, or requirements document. If we say software requirement specification document, these documents contain the functionality that need to be there as part of that particular software when it is built. Okay, and functional testing considers the specified behavior of the system and is often referred as black box testing. So functional testing is also known as black box testing, right? So you can basically, this is interchangeably used. Either you say black box testing or functional testing, it's kind of same thing. All right. So whenever you are testing the functionality, that is functional testing. Functionality could be registration functionality, user trying to register on an e-commerce website, user trying to buy something on an e-commerce website, user trying to pay on any e-commerce website. So this is e-commerce example. You can think of any other app on your phone, any other website that you interact with on a regular basis, and see what functional aspects you will be able to test. So that's what functional testing is. Now what is non-functional testing? So functional and non-functional. So every functional aspect or any functionality of an application will have a non-functional aspect to it as well. So when you have a software, it is basically required to function, or it is basically required to respond in a appropriate manner. It should be secure, it should be reliable, right? So when we say response, when we say security, when we say reliability, all of these are what? They are non-functional aspect to all of the functionalities that you have tested. So when we say you are testing an e-commerce application and then you are doing non-functional testing for it, right? So what exactly will be non-functional testing of an e-commerce application? So when a customer logs in, okay, when a customer enters username and password and clicks on the login button, how much is the response time from the server? How much time it takes for a customer to log in, okay, and then navigate to the home page of the e-commerce app. So that is the non-functional aspect of the login functionality. When we say non-functional aspect of the registration functionality, similar thing. When user enters all the details, clicks on the register button, in how many seconds or milliseconds user gets the response successful, that registration has been successful. Now, any website, any app, there are thousands and thousands of users using it at one particular time. For example, Amazon, right? So Amazon, there are thousands and thousands of people trying to buy the things from these e-commerce websites, whether it's Amazon, Flipkart, or there are so many other e-commerce websites. So when someone is, or when thousands and thousands of people are trying to log in or purchase the item at one point of time, how the website is going to respond. So any of these functionalities or any of these non-functional aspects, the response time, whether the website will be able to handle the load, whether the website will be able to handle the stress, the service will be able to handle the stress or not. Any of this aspect when is being tested, that is non-functional testing, right? So functional testing is you are just bothered about the user, how the user is going to go ahead and use the application, the functionality, and whether that functionality works as expected or not. And non-functional aspect is how quick the response is, how secure the website is. If I'm going to enter my card details, the banking details, are they secure or not? So any of this aspect when you are testing in any software or application, that is non-functional testing, right? So if you go through and read, you'll see that we test the attributes like reliability, efficiency, maintainability, usability, etc. And then in some of the non-functional testing types are performance, load, stress, usability, maintainability, reliability, portability, right? So there are many aspects of non-functional testing as well. So that's what non-functional testing is. Now let's see the difference between functional and non-functional testing. which is obviously very simple. So functional testing, because we have already covered what is functional and what is non-functional, it should be really easy for you to differentiate between functional and non-functional testing now. So functional testing tests the functionality of the system or the component, like user registration is working fine, checkout is working fine or not, right? And non-functional testing is done with an aim how well or how fast the operation is performing, right? How secure the operation is. When you say check out and do the payment, is it secure or not, right? So security, that's the non-functional aspect. So when we say non-functional aspect, is basically how fast it is, how secure it is, how reliable it is. All of that is non-functional testing. So that's the basic difference between functional and non-functional testing. Now 65th question, what is static testing, right? So when we say static testing as the word static, right? So you are not, it's static. You are not executing something. You are not making something dynamic. You are not launching an application. That's where the static testing comes in picture. So static testing is testing of a component or a system or application at the implementation level without executing the code, right? Without executing the code, you just go through, either you are just going through and looking around the code, doing the peer reviews, looking at the documents and ensuring that every required detail is available in the document. So that is what static testing is all about. So for example, you do walkthroughs, reviews, technical reviews, inspection. All of these are static testing techniques. And during static testing, software products are examined manually, right? Mostly manually. There might be some tools that could be used, but code is not executed, right? So code analysis could be done, but then actual code is not executed, it's not built, it's not, basically you're not launching the application. That's what the static testing is. You can go through the code. So usually in peer reviews, that's what happens. So when we say peer reviews, that is static testing technique as well. When the code reviews happen, that is static testing. When the other developer goes through the code and reviews that particular code, that is static testing. When the team lead or the team member or the test lead and testers review other person's test case in the team, that is static testing. They are reviewing your test cases and ensuring that you have covered all the necessary details into the test cases. Static testing helps to verify software deliverables and ensure any gaps upfront, right? And it is also known as verification. Static testing is also known as verification. It comes from that V model when we have verification and validation. So anything in the verification side, right, is static testing, and anything in the validation side is a dynamic testing, wherein the actual software is being executed and testing being done. Now, what is dynamic testing, right? So as we have static testing and dynamic testing, the testers actually launch applications. So for example, if I say go ahead and do static testing for the e-commerce website. So what you'll do, you'll go through the requirement documentation, how the login functionality has been implemented, are all the details, acceptance criteria have been captured or not in the user story that defines login functionality. So when you'll go through, read as a tester and come up with the ideas, and if there are any gaps, you will point it out. That is static testing. What is the dynamic testing of the same aspect of the login functionality? You will actually launch the website. Okay, try to put the username and password and click on the login button, and then ensure that you are getting logged in and redirected to the home page, right? That's the dynamic testing. When you actually execute the software, by executing it, you are trying to perform the actions in the software. That is dynamic testing. And dynamic testing finds the software failures, right? So is software working or not? Okay, login functionality has been implemented, registration has been implemented, but is it working or not? That you verify, that you validate when you launch the application. You put all the details, you go further, and then you go ahead and ensure that it's actually working or not. Okay, and dynamic testing technique is known as validation. As static is verification, dynamic is validation from the V model. Okay, now the next question is, what is the difference between static and dynamic testing, right? So that is another thing that can be asked from the interviewer. Somebody might ask you, what is static testing? You explain static testing, and then they might come and ask, what is difference between static and dynamic testing, right? So what is the difference between static and dynamic testing? Static testing examines the software deliverable without execution. Dynamic testing examines or test with the execution, right? You can give the same example of login functionality. When you go through the documentation, user story, and ensure everything is present there, all the acceptance criteria are present, there are no gaps in the requirement. When you examine and just review the document, that is static testing. And when you actually perform the testing of the login functionality by launching the application, providing username and password, that is dynamic testing, right? Static testing finds the cause of the failures and dynamic testing finds the failures, right? So static testing may be things are not up to date in the documentation. So in the static testing, you will find that these are the gaps, and these might impact the actual code, or when the developer will start writing code, they might not cater for these scenarios. So that is where the testers will help to identify those gaps and find the cause of the failure. And in dynamic testing, you actually find the failure, whether the software is working as expected or not. And static testing is the valid verification, and dynamic testing is known as validation, right? So that is the basic difference between static and dynamic testing. All right. Now, 68th question is, what is test development process and why it is important, right? So test development process is a very important aspect for any testers in the project. And why exactly it is important? Because we'll understand all of that. What is test development process? So test development process, when we say process, it is basically step-by-step process, right? So it will be, you follow some step and then you go further. So it's a structured approach. Okay. Test development process is nothing but a structured approach and step-by-step process followed by testers to design and develop the test cases. That's the test development process. Now, what all is basically involved in the test development process? The key phases are analysis, design, and implementation. Okay. So test analysis, test design, and test implementation. That's the key or three important phases that are involved into the test development process. And if as a tester you understand that test development is a process, or test development, you follow the step-by-step process, your test cases and the level of detail that you will capture in the test cases and scenarios, you will be absolutely amazed that structured way is always better and will give you a lot of better insights apart from the unstructured approach. So test development process is nothing but a structured approach, step-by-step approach, and high level you do analysis, you do design, and you do implementation. Right. Now, why exactly it is important? It is important because it gives you very well thought ideas and structure to your test development, to your test case documentation. Why? Because you have the first phase. You go ahead with the analysis phase first. Okay. So you analyze whatever is available, whatever documentation is available, and that's where you apply the static testing techniques to see what all information is available in the requirements, what all information is available from other stakeholders. Are there any gaps in the documentation that has been provided to you? And based on that analysis, you come up with lot of questions first thing, and those questions trigger the solutions to those questions, right? So you will find a lot of information from that analysis phase itself, and if there are any gaps in the requirement, they'll be taken care of. The further information will be provided to you, and you will start thinking from that analysis, what are you going to test basically, right? What you are going to test out of those requirements, when that application will be built by the developers. So that analysis phase, you apply the static testing. Then you go ahead with the design phase. You apply all the test case development techniques or test case design techniques, the black box testing techniques, right? So equivalence partitioning, boundary value analysis, state transition technique, decision table technique, depending on the combination, what all you can apply to test that particular application or software or functionality. You will then go ahead and design your test cases accordingly, and then you will implement, you will elaborate those scenarios or the conditions that you have defined into further steps, which will flush out what all data will be required, test data will be required to go ahead and use in that particular step of a particular test case, right? So this is the major importance of following the test development process. So if you spend time step by step in your requirement, even though if you are working in Scrum, right, it doesn't mean you straight away jump into the documentation of your test case, right? In Scrum as well, there is a lot of collaboration. You go through the user story, you work collaboratively with those user stories, you go through, read those user stories, you see the acceptance criteria, you go back to the product owner, to the business analyst with the queries. That's the analysis phase. Then you also start thinking about what all test design techniques you are going to apply in order to test those, right? That flushes out the lot of scenarios that then gets fed back to the developers, that testers are going to test these particular scenarios. And then in case the developers haven't thought about implementing those scenarios in their code, they will then go ahead and think about it, that we have to cater for these scenarios as well. And this helps us to work in a more proactive rather than reactive way, right? And if you are more proactive as a testing team, the defects will get then stopped, right? Defects will be stopped from flowing from the development phase to the testing phase. So when you actually start test execution, there might be very minimal number of defects that you are able to find, and that's the whole point. And when we say shift left or basically spread left, that is what we are trying to do. That's what you should be trying to do as the team, that you are basically helping the development team, the overall project as a testing team, to prevent the defect and not only to detect and find the defect, right? So prevention is more important and will be more cost efficient in saving, rather than when defect have already been introduced and you are finding it, then again it goes back to the developer, they fix it, they introduce more defect. That is not the absolute, that is not a good approach at all, right? We need to change it. So that is why the structured or test development process is really, really important. The step-by-step process is really, really important. Doesn't matter you're following traditional development approaches or Scrum, which is the latest agile software development approach. So let's move on to the 69th question. What is test analysis? Okay, so now from the test development process, we'll understand about the analysis, design and implementation as well. There you might be asked about the question randomly, what is test analysis? So let's see what exactly is test analysis. So test analysis is the process of looking at test basis, right, to derive test information. And when we say test basis, is anything. It could be software requirement documentation, it could be user story, it could be design document, code, existing business process, and that is what is involved in, or what is required in test analysis, right? So when you analyze any information that can help you to test a particular requirement when it is implemented into the software, that is test analysis. So you go ahead and analyze any of the details, any document, any system, any code, and come up with any of the gaps, if there are any, okay, in the requirement, and trigger the communication among the teams so that everyone is on the same page. That's the analysis part of the testing, and that is what test analysis is. And in test analysis, we find out what could be tested or the test conditions as well, right? So we parallelly find out the test conditions, then these conditions are converted into the detailed test cases, right? And then you use test design technique to figure out, good set of test cases, which is the next phase as well. And then these test conditions should be linked back to the source documentation. Why? Because it will help you to get the traceability matrix then and there, right? So say for example, you have 10 different user stories that are picked into a sprint to be built, right? 2-week sprint. Now when you write the test cases, or when you write the test condition and you link them back to the user story for which you have written it, from the tool itself you will know that yes, each of these user stories have the test condition and test cases written for it. There is no gap, and what all test cases have been written. So those test cases will then be a reference point for the developers as well. They can see, yeah, testers has written these test cases and these conditions, so I have to basically cater for and also ensure that my software, whatever I'm building, whatever code I'm writing, caters for these conditions or the test cases that they have written, that the testers have written. And that's the whole point of the test analysis phase. Okay. Now the next question and last question of the part 7 is, what is test design, which is the next phase of the test case development process. So you do analysis, wherein you come up with you analyze all the test bases, which is basically a software requirement or any existing code or business process, and based on that you come up with the test condition, test scenarios, right? Then in the test design you apply the actual technique, right? So during test design phase, you create the test cases, you elaborate those conditions that you have written into the steps. Okay. So what steps need to be performed by the tester to achieve that test condition, or to test that test condition that you have analyzed in the test analysis phase. Okay. So during the test design, you need to be very specific. You need exact detail about the steps that need to be performed. For example, in the login test case, right? So if I say in the analysis phase for login functionality, you will go through the requirements. Okay. You will go through the user stories. You will go through any other requirement that is present. You will go through the design document and then see if there are any APIs that are being built, right? And based on that, you will come up with the high level conditions or the scenarios that you are going to write or test. Okay. And then in the design phase, you are going to go ahead through those conditions and then say, yes, we need to write test cases for these conditions, right? So you'll go ahead, step 1. Okay. Launch the application in a browser, right? Then click on login button or click on login link. It will open username and password page, right? That's the expected result. So this is what you do in the test case. You elaborate step by step what a tester is going to do in order to test that condition, which is basically test login. Okay. Test login functionality. Test login using valid username and password, using invalid username, valid password, right? So these are some of the conditions that you might come up. When you elaborate the test cases, you provide the steps with the valid data that is required for that particular step in the test case. So that is what you do in the test design. You also put or you apply the test design techniques. Okay. So test case design techniques, equivalence partitioning, boundary value analysis if required. So it's kind of, you might be using some sort of those details in the analysis as well, but you elaborate a lot more into the design phase. Okay. And your test case should include input values, test data, precondition, any expected result. I've already posted how to write the test case in the Excel sheet and in the Jira, different tools, X-Ray and Zephyr as well. So you can browse through those playlists on my channel already. They are 100% published and available for free. So that will help you to basically understand how you are going to write the test case in any tool, right? And then in the test design, whatever test case you have written, this should be detailed and prioritized to ensure that the high priority test cases are executed first, right? So in test design, it's not just about documenting the test case, but also defining the priority of those test cases, how you are going to execute, what should be the priority of those as well. Okay. So that's all about the part 7 of this particular manual testing interview questions. In the part 8, so basically here we have understood about the analysis and design, which is test development process, 2 of the phases. And in the part 8, I'll cover the test implementation as well. Okay. So here from part 8, we'll cover the test implementation and other 9 questions. So basically part 8 will again cover 10 important manual testing interview questions. So that's all for this particular part 7 video. I hope this was helpful. Please do share and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.